Huh? Well, he's waiting on it to connect. I can. You just push the button. I don't care. Hello, Cheatham County. I'm so glad that y'all are here tonight. Really, I told you, I said we won't have 6. We might have 5 or 6 people here, but we're going to continue on. There's a lot of things I know, a lot of things I don't know, but when it comes to the Lord's work, I try to focus on the things I know that He's told me to do, and that's just be faithful to His Word. What's written under this pulpit on this plywood down here before we put the carpet on, where Paul told Timothy, preach the Word. All the things he's taught him, you know. If you could go back sitting in prison with him, he told Timothy that. He said, just preach the Word. And I could just hear him telling him that, can't you? And I thought that's what meant the most to me. Don't get pulled here and there and all over the place. Stand there faithfully, open up that Bible, and preach the Word. I know what the Holy Spirit has done for me and others, and I know what He'll do for you. You know, faith comes by hearing the words of Christ, and the Holy Spirit illuminates it. He lights our path, right? He helps us to understand. He gives us the discerning wisdom. And so, preaching the Word, explaining the Word, and then we take it in. And I hope that you guys tonight, I'll go quickly through this one, and share what's on your hearts. You know, whatever if you're wrestling with anything, maybe you had a good conversation at work, or somebody, you know, goes to a different church, you're not really sure how to talk to them. You know, like the lady hit me up this afternoon. She just a bunch of questions about why would Jesus pray to the Father if He's God? Who raised Him from the dead? Why did, you know, all these questions. She's been talking to Jehovah's Witness. See, I already know that by the questions she's asking. She's being tricked. She's being twisted up. So these are things I need to make sure that you guys are not twisted up on, you know. So if anything's bothering you, we'll go off camera. And I mean, we're not going to be on camera. It's just us and your church family. But I want you to ask those questions. If I don't know, I've proven to you. I'll tell you I don't know. And that's okay. I hope. If it's not okay for you, I'm sorry. But, you know, I just don't know everything. But I'll do my best to try to help you figure it out. If I don't know, Chad will know. He'll figure it out. 1 Kings 9. We're moving on along. So last couple of weeks, we've studied Solomon building the temple and his house. And he's finished the temple and his house. Last week, we looked at the big dedication service of the temple. And I told you I wasn't real sure. I kind of believe, and I'm leaning towards that they did the dedication of the temple immediately after they built the temple. Just from all I can read and study so far, that makes the most sense. Why would you wait another 12 plus years to have a dedication service for the temple? Just sitting there empty? So it seems to me that as soon as they finished the temple, they were anxious to bring the Ark of the Covenant in, and they went through that whole big ceremony that we read last week. So this week, let's see what God thinks about the dedication service. So Solomon has spoke this big long prayer, and well, I won't say nothing about that. He spoke this big long prayer, and now let's see what God thinks about it. So verse 1 of 1 Kings 9 says, Now it came about when Solomon had finished building the house of the Lord and the king's house, and all that Solomon desired to do, that the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time, as he had appeared to him at Gibeon. Now Gibeon, let me take you back to the first time that God appeared, the Lord appeared to Samuel. Goodness gracious, Derek. To Solomon. Let's look at it on the screen. 1 Kings 3. Now Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David, except he sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. So we talked about that. He didn't go into the tent of tabernacle, you know, like David did. He went up on the out into the open areas, which was probably a sign of letting all see what he's doing. You know, he's drawing some attention. So that was kind of an early indicator to us of what's going on with old Solomon, you know. But anyway, the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. And in Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream at night, and God said, Ask what you wish me to give you. So that was the first time the Lord appeared to Solomon at Gibeon. Now, y'all remember when we studied Joshua? Remember what happened at Gibeon? Gibeon was those people. So here comes the children of Israel into the promised land, and they're wiping out everybody. They're killing everybody. And these people are like, whoa. So they made their clothes look really worn and tattered, made their sandals look worn and tattered, their wineskins, got the old wineskins out, made their bread really hard. And then they come walking up to Joshua and the men were like, we've come from a long ways off because we know about your God and we want to join all of you. Well, they lied. They just put on this big show. Well, the men out there, and the soldiers, they figured it out pretty quick. Like, man, these guys are our neighbors. They're faking. But Joshua had already made a covenant with them, a promise with them. So he couldn't go back on his word. So what he did was he made them the workers of the wood and the wine presses and things like that. I believe it was wine presses, but I know he's makers of wood. They did a lot of labor for him, which they eventually used these people here in the building of his stuff. So also what happened at Gibeon is when Joshua, after all, so these people that had faked out Joshua, then all the other Amorites and all these people come back on them trying to attack them, and Joshua goes down there to defend them. And that's when he prayed to the Lord for the sun to stop. God, he actually stopped the sun and the moon in the sky. Didn't move. It's the only time it's ever happened since then. That's a true story in the Bible. It happened. And you can go ask scientists. They'll probably say that the earth kept turning, but the sun just started turning with the earth. Because what happens if the earth just stopped? The oceans would flood the planet. So it's probably that the sun changed direction, but it says the moon stood still and the sun stood still. So that's what God did. That was a neat thing that happened at Gibeon. So I just wanted to give you a little history back. The Gibeon's been around a long time, this area. And it's just north of Jerusalem. So that's where the Lord appeared to him again. And look in verse 3. What does God say? What did God think about the dedication service? The Lord said to him, I have heard your prayer and your supplication, which you have made before me. I have consecrated this house, which you have built, by putting my name there forever. And my eyes and my heart will be there perpetually. God made his presence known. The last time that God made his presence known, we read about this last week. Look up on the screen again. It happened that when the priest came from the holy place, the cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priest could not stand to minister because of the cloud. For the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. Can y'all imagine that? Can you imagine this, the glory of the Lord coming into this place, a cloud, and that we couldn't even stand? I mean, that's amazing to me to think about the glory of God. And then also to think about the Shekinah glory of God. You know, the one that when Moses, just looked at his hind parts as his glory passed by, and he glanced, and it turned his face blood red just by looking upon him, because no man can look at the face of God and live. No man has seen God. No man can look upon God. Well, obviously here in this passage, he said, I've consecrated this house by putting my name there forever. God is not promising to live there physically, literally, in this temple, right? Remember last week, Solomon had said, we know that the universe could not hold you. He's God. He's not literally building a house for God to go and, just sit upon a throne inside of this temple. In fact, we know that he didn't intend to live there forever, because in 400 years, what are we learning on Wednesday night? Babylon comes in there, Nebuchadnezzar and them, and wipe out the temple. So it's done, 587 BC. They destroy the temple. But in the millennial kingdom, we're going to see that God is keeping his promise, that even then, in the millennial kingdom, after the rapture of the church is over, here comes the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down from heaven. The New Jerusalem, it's called. The Tabernacle of God, the holy city, the city of God, the celestial city, the city foursquare, and the heavenly Jerusalem. All of that is referencing this. What's going to happen is the new city, Jerusalem, is going to come down from heaven and park itself in Jerusalem. The Dome of the Rock will be no more. Right? Amen. I like that. But the point is that God will never abandon his people. Now, what has he done with the Jewish people? He's blinded them. He's cut them off. Now, I think looking at this group, I feel like we've stress that enough to understand a partial hardening has come upon Israel. Paul explains all that in Romans 9 through 11. Because of their disobedience, they've been blinded, cut off, and thus Gentiles were grafted in. We were able to hear the gospel and be saved. Okay? But after the church is taken out, now he's going to go back to those Jews. He's going to keep his promise. He's going to open their eyes, and they're going to be saved. Okay? That's what the Bible says. Now look at verse 4. As for you, if you will walk before me as your father David walked, in integrity of heart and uprightness, doing according to all that I have commanded you, doing according to all that I have commanded you, and will keep my statutes and my ordinances, then I will establish the throne of your kingdom over Israel forever, just as I promised to your father David, saying, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. Now, God gives a command. He says, if you do this, then I'm going to do that. That's a lesson for all of us parents, right? If we say, if you do that, you're going to suffer this consequence. What kind of, we wouldn't look like very much. We wouldn't be setting a good standard. If, as I said to my cousin one time, if you don't quit doing that, then I'm going to tell you to quit doing that again. And you just keep doing that over and over. Well, God, He gave them these warnings, and that's what this is. Now, God's not demanding a perfect obedience from Solomon. Did we see perfect obedience from David? No, he says, if you walk as your father did. Now, David wasn't perfect, all right? But he told him to walk as your father walked, which is something he's saying, look at it this way, it's not out of reach for you, Solomon. I'm not giving you something that you can't do. Same thing for us parents. We're not going to give them an order or a command in our home that they just can't do, right? That's when he gets in the New Testament. He says, fathers, don't provoke your children. That means don't give them something they can't do. But Solomon remembered here when the Lord tells him this, it would have triggered his mind because he says, oh, I heard my daddy say the same thing. Watch this. Look at 1 Kings 2, all the way back to the beginning. It's David's time to as his time to die drew near, he charged Solomon his son, saying, I'm going the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and show yourself a man. Keep the charge of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his ordinances, and his testimonies, according to what is written in the law of Moses, that you may succeed in all that you do, and wherever you turn, so that the Lord may carry out his promise which he spoke concerning me, saying, if your sons are careful of their way, to walk before me in truth, with all their heart and with all their soul, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. And fathers, I think all of us would agree, if we're on our dying bed, if we could open up to that passage and say, son, read that. That's what I want to tell you. You just walk with God. Don't walk with this world. This world ain't got nothing for you. It's a lie. It'll destroy you. You walk with God. And you can do that. God's calling you. He's not going to give you something to do or command you to do something and not equip you with the ability to do it. So, He's not a get you God, right? He wants to bless you and He wants to help you, but all He asks is that you be obedient. Here, that's what He's telling me. If you walk in my statutes, according to, all that the law of Moses, right? Keep the law of God. Verse 6 says, but if you or your sons indeed turn away from following me and do not keep my commandments and my statutes, which I have set before you, and go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land which I have given them, and the house which I have consecrated for my name I will cast out of my sight. So Israel will become a proverb and a byword among all peoples. Boy, has that not come true? What does the world think about Israel today? Not much. In fact, about the only thing you hear is, have y'all ever heard of the term anti-Semitism? People don't think too highly of Jewish people. And they're God's chosen people. So that word came true, did it not? Verse 8 says, and this house will become a heap of ruins. Did that not happen? 70 A.D. Titus came in there and leveled it. Jesus had said, not one stone be left upon another, and that's exactly what happened. And all they have is one of the retaining walls that's left over there. one of the little lower walls, retaining wall, and they call that the Wailing Wall, and the Jews stand in front of it every day wailing, waiting on the Messiah to come. And we're like, guys, he came. You missed him. But he's going to come. He's going to come again. Now, this house will become a heap of ruins, and it did. Everyone who passes by will be astonished and hiss and say, why has the Lord done thus to this land and to this house? The lesson, obviously, Solomon, there will be consequences for your disobedience. God made it clear from the very beginning that he would not tolerate them going after other gods. We've seen another point here. You can imagine putting yourself in these people, these Jewish people's mindset. They're so excited. They've got their temple. They've been chasing this tent around all around in the wilderness, right? They built up this little temporary house for God. David so much wanted to build a house for the Lord, but he didn't do it. Now, finally, it's here. After all of these years, they've got their temple. Y'all might remember when they first got into the Promised Land that they thought they could take that Ark of the Covenant to battle with them without seeking God, without talking to Him, and they just picked up the Ark and took it, and they lost the battle, and they lost the Ark. Like, what happened? They were trusting in the Ark and not the God of the Ark. God knows how they think, so maybe we've got this big temple here. We're going to find our power, we're going to find our influence, Canon, in the rest of the world. They're going to be looking upon us, they're going to be noticing us because of this great temple that we've built, and not the God of the temple. That was always been their problem, right? Look at us instead of look at my God. And so he's warning them here. And I think that was, we'll see later, that exactly what happens. In fact, by the time when we're studying in Daniel, by the time you get to that point, the temple done turned into nothing. I mean, it's just a storage bin. They're not using it for anything. So God's made it clear He will not have this. 1 Kings 9 says, and they will say, because they forsook the Lord their God, who brought their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and adopted other gods and worshipped them and served them, therefore the Lord has brought all this adversity on them. You know what's interesting? Moses predicted this would happen. And it does. That's in Deuteronomy 29, I think I read, if you want to take notes on that. But Moses predicted that would happen. Now, let's move on and see what happens. So, verse 10 says, and it came about at the end of 20 years in which Solomon had built the two houses, the house of the Lord and the king's house. Hiram, king of Tyre, had supplied Solomon with cedar and cypress timber and gold according to all his desire. Remember that? He went to this man, he bought him all that stuff to build everything with. Then King Solomon gave Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. All right, here you go, buddy. Thanks for all the wood and the gold. You know, you've built all this beautiful mansion in the temple. Here, I'm going to give you 20 cities for payment. So Hiram came out from Tyre to see the cities which Solomon had given him, and they did not please him. He said, what are these cities which you have given me, my brother? So they were called the land of Kabul to this day, which literally means good for nothing. Why have you given me these good for nothing lots of land out here? If you look on the Google Earth at that area, it still ain't much. So it's like, what is Solomon doing here? Do you really value what this man did for you? We'll give you some wasteland out there. Here you go. We're going to give you some wasteland. Well, it's clear that Hiram thought they were worthless. And he even actually taunts Solomon, why are you doing this? He lets him know he's not pleased with it. But even though he was displeased, Hiram still gave him money. Look at verse 14. And Hiram sent to the king 120 talents of gold. Frankie, do you know how much a talent of gold is? I didn't either, so I looked it up. A talent of gold, they say, is about 70 pounds. 1 talent, about 70, 75, depending on who you look at. 70, 75 pounds for 1 talent. Is that about how much you weigh? Pretty close. 70 pounds of gold. So what's the math? Times 120 talents. My math's about 840 pounds. So I looked this up. What is that worth today? In 2015, they say that's about $161 million. In 2015 value. So Hiram gave him a lot of gold. He gave him all this wood, gives him all this gold. I thought that was a pretty good deal for Solomon. Of course, everybody wants to be on their God's side, right? Don't you want to be in the good graces of the children of Israel? They done learned from David. Remember, he done made buddies with David. You don't want to be on the bad side of God's people. Still true today. You don't want to be on the bad side of God's people. And I'm not just talking about the Jewish people, Christian people. There's no better bodyguard than the Lord Jesus Christ, I promise you. You remember, I like to use the lesson of him just when he said, I am he, and 600 soldiers fell down. Think about that. Just the breath of Christ. 600 men, soldiers, fell down. Don't you like him backing you up, Hannah? He's got you back. So, verse 15 says, Now in this account of the forced labor which King Solomon levied to build the house of the Lord, his own house, the Millo, the wall of Jerusalem, Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer. For Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up and captured Gezer and burned it with fire, and killed the Canaanites who lived in the city, and had given it as a dowry to his daughter, Solomon's wife. So who's that coming back to? So Solomon rebuilt Gezer and the lower Beth Horon, and Baaloth and Tamar in the wilderness, in the land of Judah. And all the storage cities which Solomon had, even the cities for his chariots and the cities for his horsemen, and all that it pleased Solomon to build in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, and in all the land under his rule. See what's happening here? He's done built the temple and his house, and what's he doing? He's building his empire. He's building out, right? Setting the people up. As for all the people who were left of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, who were not of the sons of Israel, their descendants who were left after them in the land, whom the sons of Israel were unable to destroy utterly. Why were they unable? Do y'all remember? It wasn't because they couldn't. It's because they wouldn't. And we're still dealing with those people. From them Solomon levied forced laborers even to this day. Solomon repeats the disobedience of what God had told him to do with those people. He said, wipe them off the face of the earth. They're spreading evil throughout the world. Verse 22, But Solomon did not make slaves of the sons of Israel, for they were men of war, his servants, his princes, his captains, his chariot commanders, and his horsemen. So he took all the bad guys, instead of killing them all, he kept them, made them slaves to do the hard work for him. He made his guys, the men of Israel, be soldiers. And verse 24 says, As soon as Pharaoh's daughter came up from the city of David to her house, which Solomon had built for her, then he built the Millo. Now, first, he wasn't even supposed to marry a foreign woman. Right off the bat, he's marrying the Pharaoh's daughter, an Egyptian. So Solomon's already doing what his father did, kind of bending the rules, wanting to go his own way. And I'm telling you, when I read this Bible all the time, when you get outside of God's will, when you disobey God, there's going to be consequences. They may not always be death, but there's some things worse than death. And you walk away from the Lord, that's where it's still that way. Now, Hazor, he talks about there, this was a place, and these places that Hazor and Megiddo and Gezer, these are places that Solomon is being strategic with, okay? They're what they called back then bulwarks. They were set up against these invaders. People are always trying to come and take over somebody else's land back then, you know. So that he always has to be on the defensive. What about us as Christians? We're always on the defensive, aren't we? I mean, that's spiritually speaking. But they were always physically under attack. In fact, this place, Hazor, will ultimately be destroyed when Tiglath-Pileser comes in, and we'll hear about him in some other passages. Megiddo, y'all have heard that name in Revelation. We just went through with Scott. That's where the battle of what? What's going to happen in Megiddo? Armageddon. Gezer, that's on that road from Joppa. Remember hearing about Joppa? Who was the guy that went up from Joppa? Jonah. Remember that story? So all of these areas, these names, I'm not asking you to be a geographical expert, but sometimes we need to just hear the names, you know, and we kind of pick up on the history that's going on over there. Joppa had been a powerful Canaanite city. So this was what we're seeing here is another compromise by Solomon. God had strictly commanded that the remnants of these tribes were to be driven out of the land, not used as slave laborers. But Solomon didn't drive them out of the land. He used them as forced laborers. Look at verse 25. Now 3 times in a year Solomon offered burnt offerings and peace offerings on the altar which he built to the Lord, burning incense with them on the altar which was before the Lord. So he finished the house. 3 times in a year Solomon offered burnt offerings. Who remembers what the 3 great feasts were of the year for the Jewish people? What's the big one we do? We Passover. The other one is the Feast of Weeks and the Feast of Booths. Those were the 3 main Jewish festivals. Of course, they have a lot of other times that they got together, but he kept those 3. That's described back in Deuteronomy 16. That's where they actually had to come to the temple with their sacrifices. Verse 26 says, King Solomon also built a fleet of ships in Ezion-Geber. He's already out to the coast now. He's moving from Jerusalem all the way out to the coast. He is really establishing this protection around the area that God has given them. And Hiram sent his servants with the fleet, sailors who knew the sea, along with the servants of Solomon. They went to Ophir and took 420 talents of gold from there and brought it to King Solomon. So he just got 120 talents of gold. Now he's getting almost 3 times that. So if you look in today's value, 15 million, by almost 3 times that, another 40-something million. He just racked in about $50-something million in today's time. Plus all the wealth that David had already stored up for him. All the gold, and he's got everything. Everything he could ever need. Now you know why when Solomon writes Ecclesiastes, he understands he's had it all. Solomon has had more than any man in the history of the world has ever had. He had all of the money. He had all of the power. 1,000 wives. He had everything a man could think he could ever want. And at the end, he said it was all what? Vanity. It was all worthless. It meant nothing. So, is that interesting, Kylie? I could tell you was on it the whole time. I'm so proud of you. Done. Anybody got any?